All right. I've also never done a public reading before, so a little slack. I'm going to be reading from The Utterly Uninteresting and Unadventurous Tales of Fred the Vampire Accountant. Pretty self-explanatory in the title. Going to be kind of obviously jumping in, so no one likes the intro. This is chapter 4 in story number 2, titled A Zombie at the LARP. I have got to stop leaving the apartment, I mumbled to myself as we skulked through the forest towards the main area where everyone was assembled. I mean skulked in a very literal sense. It seemed that all of we revivalist vampires had an ability to blend in with the scenery and become more or less invisible. According to the back of the badge, the way we signified this was by hunching forward and moving carefully, as well as putting our index fingers on both sides of our heads. That's right, I was hunching my way through the forest with finger horns. Somehow, when I was human and dreamed about a different life, one where I was powerful and immortal, this was a scenario I had never imagined. Most of those fantasies had been cheap rip-offs of well-done films, involving me being socially gregarious as well as unstoppably cool. I couldn't even fathom what would make someone incorporate something this asinine into their own fantasies. Still, I was supposed to blend, so blend I did. It took us considerable time to get back to the main event, mostly because of our slow-moving, hunched pace, but we finally parted a section of trees and found ourselves facing the mingling crowd and a folding table stocked with foam weapons. Lord Drake jerked his head northward, and we began our agonizing walk in that direction. Let me tell you something. I've been forced to do some ridiculous things in my lifetime. I've put my head in the toilet for swirlies, eaten dirt, and even been made to dance like a cha-cha girl on one humiliating occasion, all to avoid being beaten up. For the dickens, though, I cannot imagine what would make someone willingly do what we did as we crept through the crowd. We did our hunch walk with our finger horns, skulking through them, all while pretending they couldn't see us. Adding to the oddness, they all clearly noticed us and wanted to know what was going on, but had to pretend we were invisible. It was like embarrassment and stupidity compacted. To their credit, not one person broke character and approached us, and we moved past the majority of the players into a more open area onto the north side of the park. From there, we could see Emperor Nikolai speaking in hushed tones to some of the other players. One of them was the person with the Charlie Brown ghost costume, and one looked to be wearing a werewolf mask, so their races were pretty obvious. The other two I recognized even more easily, though. They were Albert the henchman and my own dear Sonny the succubus. I briefly wondered why she was a part of the little powwow, but then I guessed it made sense. If you need to investigate, why not go right to the top? None of that changed the plan, of course. Lord Drake had known that Emperor Nikolai would be speaking to a few delegates at a time, with only his servant Albert as protection. I wasn't sure what kind of monster Albert was supposed to be, and I hadn't had the chance to ask, but Lord Drake seemed pretty certain we would be able to overpower him easily. The goal here was for us to creep up on the separated few and spring into action. Each of us was supposed to do battle with one of the delegates, while Lord Drake and 2 of his servants took down the Emperor. That way the kill would be assigned to Lord Drake, and he would have cause to lobby that he should be the new emperor. New emperor means he makes the rules, which means no more hiding from the humans, and yada, yada, yada. The main point I had gleaned from all of that was that I needed to pick a person and play rock, paper, scissors with them. Either they won, or I did. After that, none of this was my problem anymore, and hopefully Crystal was ready to go. We resumed our skulking, moving delicately, yet purposefully, toward our soon-to-be deposed emperor. Lord Drake, Maria, and another girl broke off to circle around toward the rear where the Emperor was located. The rest of us continued creeping up on our targets. Since I was near her side anyway, I locked my vision on Crystal and decided to battle her. I think it was because I was focused only on her that I noticed the quick gesture she made, scratching the top of her nose with her thumb. I had only an instant to ponder why she would use a thumb instead of a finger, when strange words rang through the air. Ectorum novendum bicrodil. It was Neil's voice, and it rang out with an authority and power, more than I would have thought the kid capable of. When he spoke again, it was somewhat less impressive. As you all have noticed, you are now frozen in place thanks to my spell, Emperor Nikolai said, closing the large black tome he had obviously been reading from and handing it to Albert. None of you have applicable immunities or resistances, and yes, we are quite aware you revivalists are here. Your camouflage power was dispelled the moment I froze you. There was a ripple of gasping and shock from our vampires, as well as players nearby. I'd suspect for some time you might try an uprising, so I took necessary precautions, he continued. At this point, Crystal, or should I say Sunny, bounced over and smiling dumbly as he slipped an arm around her. My new consort here is a succubus, and as most of you know, they possess the ability to see past all veils and illusions. Emperor Nikolai released his grip on Sunny and walked over to Lord Drake, who, to his credit, was remaining stock still, and leaned into Drake's face. So, the great lord reduced to nothing more than a mere mannequin. How elegantly pathetic. You underestimated me, Drake. You thought that just because I was genetically human, I would go down easy. After all, what possible threat can a mere mage be? Emperor Nikolai stepped back from Drake and walked back over to his group, picking up the black book from Albert's waiting hands. You should have done a little research first, Drake. You might have realized that I'm not just a mage, I'm a necromancer, a spellcaster with power over all forms of death, and that includes the undead. Binding you walking corpses required a little more effort from me than turning a page. Emperor Nikolai gave Drake a look of sheer condescension, gloating without restraint. Now the only question is what to do with you all. I think I shall unbind you, after wrapping you in silver chains, of course, so that Albert may escort you back into the forest. I will finish up my party with my dear subjects, and spend the time thinking of a fitting punishment for you. With that, the Emperor clapped his hands, and Albert pulled a large chest from behind a tree. He began yanking out long lengths of chain, as well as several padlocks. Albert started with Lord Drake, then slowly made his way to each of us, covering us in the chains so that we could barely move and connecting us into one giant undead chain gang. None of which was my biggest concern. You see, my problem had started the minute good old Neil had shouted those seemingly gibberish words. I was completely frozen, unable to move even my own eyes. That spell of his had been real, and I was captured by it, which meant three things. One, I wasn't the only real monster here. Two, I was the worst possible race to try and stop him. And three, we were in deep shit. Again.
Are there any questions for Drew? Anybody have a question?
Yes.
So what made you pick a vampire as your lead?
I actually wanted to go with one of the most overused characters, because the whole purpose of Fred the Vampire Count is that's pretty much Fred's tone throughout the whole book. He never becomes awesome or cool or fun. And that's very counter to how most of the paranormal books roll these days. It's always awkward person, is bad at life, becomes supernatural, initially rejects it, embraces it, most awesome guy in like 100 years. I wanted to do someone who was just the opposite of that, and vampire, since it was so overused, was the perfect fit. Yes?
How did a real vampire wind up as a vampire at a LARP event?
His girlfriend dragged him to it.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, probably should have given a little more setup. But.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone knows what LARPing
That
is.
brought in the question.
There you go.
You were working on it for that.
Yeah, that was all planned completely.
I noticed you have some other fantasy books. Is it fantasy, sci-fi?
I think I fall well within the comedic fantasy role. Superheroes in college, NPCs from a D&D game, gods stuck in pairs, that kind of thing.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.